All right, Sharon, handing it over to you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Jody. Well, first of all, everyone, welcome to the December 3rd Policy Committee meeting. We have Jessica from Shipman Goodwin with us this morning to go over some of the documents that we are and policies that we're considering right now as well. But I guess we're going to start first of all by
Steve is joining.
Great. Good morning, Steve, when he gets here. We'll start by going over the minutes from last month's meeting. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at them? And have you got any questions? Questions? Nope. All right, great. Can I have a motion to I'm totally spacing this morning. Can I have a motion to go ahead and accept last month's meetings, please?
Motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
Thank you, Steve. Second?
Yep, second.
All right, great. All in favor? So we have approved last month's meeting minutes. And I guess our first policy, should we just hop right into policy or should we talk with Jessica first so that we don't necessarily have to have her on the whole call for us?
Well, I think, if I may, so the policies of the non-discrimination and non-discrimination community, we just brought them back to kind of put a pause in it for Jessica, because I know that Michael had some questions still about investigations and things like that. You want to share your concerns?
Yeah. Sorry. Look, Jessica. So first of all, thanks for joining us this morning.
Sure.
Busy time. Lot going on now with sort of Title IX and the anticipated changes that are going to come back up in January / February, and I'm assuming we're reverting back. And had a bunch of questions. So we changed the policy, of course, this past year. I'm getting feedback, please.
I think, Steve, we're getting some bad feedback from you. If you could mute for a second.
There's no noise here.
Yeah, weird. Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. All right.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's strange. All right. So we had we just changed the policy basically this past year, updating of course the policy with all the new changes. The question, I guess the overall arching question for you, Jessica, is how, what changes are you expecting here going forward? How are you advising other districts to prepare for those potential changes? And sort of, within that is how do we maintain, let's say, the flexibility of our policy so that we are, let's say, covered from the standpoint of being compliant with, let's say, the state of Connecticut and any updated changes that are going to happen here on the federal level?
Yeah. So are we just talking about Title IX for now? I can make a kind of a global statement about what I anticipate. Yeah. So I anticipate, other than Title IX, I don't expect that much of anything that you will need to do in terms of changes to your policies. I don't expect that you'll need to do anything. And the reason for that is that I don't think that the new administration is going to have its eyes focused on anything other than Title IX related laws and policies. For example, transgender student rights are a big one, and that really comes in with Title IX. But the major reason why I don't expect to see any changes with respect to your other non-discrimination policies is that Connecticut law is not going to change. I'm virtually certain that Connecticut law is not going to change. And Connecticut law has long offered protections to transgender students in the sense that gender identity and expression was added to one of the protected classes a couple of years ago, actually relatively recently. And so the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, otherwise known as the CHRO, will still enforce Connecticut's non-discrimination laws. And so the policies that I know are on your agenda are really rooted in those. Now, federal law does kind of overlap there. What I do anticipate potentially changing is the enforcement at a federal level of those laws. So the agency responsible for enforcing civil rights protections is the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Well, I know that there's been a lot of talk about disbanding the Department of Education. I don't really think that that's going to happen. But what I think could happen is that the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, is probably going to be less vigilant in terms of taking enforcement actions at the local level. Again, the CHRO is your state enforcement agency. And this is just my guess. I have no idea what will come to pass, but I think it's possible that the CHRO may become more vigilant if knowing that OCR may become less vigilant. So long story short, I don't anticipate anything changing other than Title IX. So let me pause there because then I'll talk about Title IX. Any questions about that?
No, very clear.
Okay. Title IX, I think is, it's virtually certain to change. And so when the rules changed in 2020 under the Trump administration, that was a long time in the making because there is a rulemaking process that takes a very, very long time. That rulemaking process concluded after years, and we ended up with the 2020 regulations. 4 years later, we ended up with the Biden regulations because it takes, that long. But now we have the 2020 regulations. They exist. Really easy to kind of flip back to them. The process isn't going to just be flipping a switch. But as I think I told you all before, and if I didn't, I stand corrected, 24 regulations can't even be enforced in 26 states right now. There are injunctions in 26 states. So, and there are also certain schools in states where there aren't injunctions, including schools in Connecticut, schools in Ridgefield, schools in Darien, schools in Wilton, that cannot enforce the 2024 regulations. So we're basically already there. We're basically already we're kind of between the 2024 and 2020 regulations. That list, and stop me if you don't know why that is. I don't remember what I shared with you all when I came and presented, but
I don't recall why it is at the
I
schools.
don't either. Yeah, I don't either. Is that
great?
I'm assuming that's not public. Those are private schools.
No, public schools.
They're public. Okay.
Interesting.
And the reason, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's freezing a little bit. Okay. The reason for that is that over the summer, 3 parent plaintiff organizations,
Hold on, Jessica, you froze. You said 3 parent organizations and you froze.
I don't know why.
Oh no.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can.
Yes, we can now.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure why. I have trouble with Google Meet. 3 parent plaintiff organizations, Moms for Liberty, which I'm sure you've heard of, Female Athletes United, and Young America's Foundation, brought a lawsuit in a federal district court in Kansas, alleging that the new Title IX regulations violated basically their rights to parent their children. And the crux of that was the protection for transgender students that was added to the 2024 regulations. Are you still with me? Okay. And so the federal district court in Kansas, in response to that, said, okay, anybody, any child of a member of one of these organizations who was enrolled in a school, that school cannot apply the 2024 regulations anywhere in the country. And the U.S. Department of Education appealed that to the Supreme Court. They appealed that injunction and they lost. The Supreme Court upheld the injunction. So we have this growing list of schools that we monitor weekly where somebody raises their hand and says, my school needs to be added because my child, I'm a member of Moms for Liberty, and my child is enrolled in, Hurlbut Elementary School. So, this is all public information, but Cider Mill School and Miller Driscoll and Wilton have to apply the 2020 regulations, but Wilton High School applies the 2024 regulations. East Ridge Middle School in Ridgefield applies the 2020 regulations. All the other schools in Ridgefield apply the 2024 regulations. Middlesex Middle School in Darien applies the 2020 regulations. So I share this with you because it's already a patchwork. And Michael, you asked me about the flexibility. My answer to that is we all have to be flexible. It changes every single day. My advice is keep your 20, you have to keep your 2020 regulations anyway, but those are undoubtedly likely to return either without change or with some changes that are modest. For now, though, you are still operating, as far as I know, as of, actually, I didn't check this morning, but as far as I know, all of your schools in Weston are still operating under the 2024 regulations. And I think that's going to remain true for the rest of this school year. And then we just have to be prepared to switch back.
Jessica, is that an immediate switch? So someone raises their hand in town tomorrow and says, hey, we're a member. I'm a parent of a child who attends these schools. I'm a member of this organization. Does that switch immediately? Is there some sort of period by which that gets evaluated? Like how reactive / proactive do we have to be in those circumstances in terms of our policies?
Yeah, I mean, typically what happens if you had a parent write to Lisa, and say, hey, I'm a member of Moms for Liberty, so you can't apply. I don't think it works like that. They have to register with the court and be added to this official list, which is maintained on the Department of Education's website. I have not yet been asked the question of, but what if they push back and say, but there's a federal, lawsuit that says you can't apply this to me. Call me if and when that happens. I know we're being recorded here, but in a way, it almost doesn't matter from my perspective because we are going to be back there anyway. I'm virtually certain. It's just a matter of time. As a practical matter for all of you, the real difference is the procedures with the 2020 regulations and also the definition of sexual harassment. But as a substantive matter, it really isn't going to change because, as I said before, Connecticut law protects students on the basis of gender identity and expression. So even if it's not federal law sexual harassment, it's not going to be a free-for-all. But the process will revert to this much more cumbersome kind of procedurally protective, so to speak, process where you've got to have multiple different people involved. It takes really a minimum of 90 school days for the whole process to be completed. And the definition of sexual harassment under Title IX federal law will be a much higher standard.
So two quick questions for me. I'll kick it off to everyone else too. I guess I assume that the state of Connecticut, just as these 26 states have basically resisted the federal changes, I assume that if the federal law changes, that Connecticut would resist that. Is that a fair statement? Because we're essentially taking, right, the state of Connecticut's position on this as a school district, and the state of Connecticut can just turn around, even if the federal law changed, right? I assume, and just resist that, just as these 26 states have. Is that they wouldn't automatically just adopt it, which would mean that we would have to automatically adopt. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
So when resist means they file a lawsuit in a federal court and it's enjoined, meaning it's the Federal Office for Civil Rights is prevented from enforcing the new federal regulations in the state. I just don't, my gut is I don't see that happening because I don't think that the political climate will lend itself to that injunction being upheld, frankly. I don't see that happening. It didn't happen under the 2020 regulations. I think that that's very unlikely to happen. I could be corrected, and this is just a prediction. It's a really good question, Michael, because you're right. Now there's a roadmap for this.
Right.
But the basis for those injunctions really had to do with the transgender piece of it. It wasn't just, oh, we don't like this process, right? And it had to do with a legal theory around that. And here in Connecticut, we already have protections for gender identity and expression. So we couldn't really use that. You know, and I don't know that we would have a basis to resist the procedural changes or a basis to resist the change in the definition of sexual harassment, except as it excludes protection of gender identity and expression. But again, Connecticut law fills in that gap.
So my last question on this is, okay, so short term, sort of medium term, let's say next year. In the short term, as we look at the policies, should we be amending language, let's say, as it even relates to the investigative procedure, right? Because in that change, it went from having, I guess, this group-based, right, evaluation to a single person, with the district having the option of having a single person sort of manage, let's say, that process, right? Should we be, I know we wanted the language to be flexible to say, look, the district could basically use, let's say, one person that process. Should that be amended, Jessica, to saying that we're going to go back to, you know, let's say this group or this committee based investigative process?
So let me just, Michael, I think that, let me just kind of explain one thing that I think is maybe a misunderstanding. So
Sure.
Under the 2020 regulations, it wasn't a committee. It was the idea that you had to have 3 different people doing 3 different pieces of the process.
Right.
Which is, to be blunt, a really difficult process for K-12. The 2024 regulations permitted school districts to have what I had called a unified model, meaning even I'll use your word committee. I don't mean it. The idea isn't that you have one person versus multiple people. The idea is that it's one group of people or person do the investigation and make the decision, whether it's one person or whether it's a committee or group of people. I do recommend wherever possible to have more than one person. And I know that that's what we had all talked about before is, do we require that? Do we allow flexibility? But what is the option under the 2024 regulations is whether to preserve this idea that you have one person investigating and a separate person making the decision. And my advice was, why would you do that to yourself? That's a very difficult process. It takes longer. Basically would, best practice would be to have 2 separate reports, an investigative report and a decision-making report. I don't know a single school district in Connecticut that has done that. They've all adopted this unified model. And then the question is whether you have one person doing that or whether you have a couple of people working together. I think it's a good idea wherever possible to have a couple of people working together. So let me just pause there to see if that helps.
And Lisa has suggested that too, like that would be optimal, right? And so I was fine with that. I guess the question is, in the language states though that we have the option, let's say, of this, let's say, you know, your word unified, right, procedure. Can that remain in the language, at least as of now, Jessica, or should that be changed?
So I think the language says that it can be one person or more than one person, right?
Right. Can we still leave that? That language gives us flexibility. Yeah. I know that we're erring on the side of, more, but can we even still have that language? Should we still have that language in there of it can be one person?
Well, nothing. So from my perspective, yes, you can, because nothing has changed yet. I think the discussion we had before still stands. Whereas if you have a relatively simple issue and you're a smaller district, right? And so I think the thinking there was you may not always have two people available to do this, and it may be appropriate for you to have one person. There are plenty of investigations where you have one administrator handling them because they're fairly straightforward. So I would be concerned about boxing yourselves in and requiring in every instance that you take two administrators to work on something. Part of that is that with I'll call it kind of a lower threshold in terms of what meets the definition of sex-based harassment. With that, some of these issues that come up might be very simple, straightforward kind of one-off issues, and you don't really need two people looking at them. A comment or a couple of comments that one student makes to another student in a class. And some of the issues are much more serious. And so with the more serious, more kind of broader in scope issues, you'll very likely have more than one person on it. But to require that in every instance you have more than one person investigating, I think could hamstring you in a way that could burden your administration and take them away from other things they might need to be doing, where they don't need to be looking at something that's relatively simple.
Last question. If the law changes, if it changes with the upcoming administration, as we all think it will, how quickly do we have, what's the time frame, Jessica, for us to react to, let's say, amend the policy given, the expanded, scope of these definitions, the lower thresholds, et cetera? Do we have the ability, does the policy, the policy, the 2024 policy stay intact through the school year, and then we're talking about amending the policy for the next school year, or do we have to be more reactive than that?
Yeah, so I have good news and bad news. I'll give you the bad news first. The bad news is you don't get much notice. Usually the changes take effect on August 1st. And so my prediction is that come August 1st, 2025, we're going to be back to some version of the 2020 regulations. But that's the good news. We know what those regulations are going to look like. Your administrators are trained on them. I think that every single board I've worked with has had some lag time between when the new regulations take effect and when they adopt the new policy. I think that there are probably some districts out there that still have yet to adopt the 2024 regulations as their policy. So that's fine and expected because boards, you're not going to meet necessarily on August 2nd. But there are ways to deal with that. The law is the law. Your administration is going to have to follow the new law no matter what, and you'll adopt the policy. Hopefully that will be your first priority at the beginning of next school year. But in the meantime, the regulations really could be administratively adopted and implemented.
Excellent. Any other questions? Steve, do you have any questions at all? I know you know. Michael, those are great questions. Thanks for asking. I agree with Jessica and trying to make sure we don't box ourselves in with some of these. I do clearly, I think that the more, especially with a larger issue, it's so important, but for the smaller things to remain flexible and just have one administrator responsible for an investigation decision, I think is probably the best way for us to move forward. Excuse me. Lisa, was there anything else you wanted to talk about on this one?
No, I think that we're good. If you guys feel comfortable, I want to thank you. Thanks, Jessica, for being here with us. I think that I think that she can be excused from the meeting.
That would be good.
Actually, can I ask one last question? Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead. Or
Jessica,
you can stay in case you think of one.
Well, no, I want to let you go, Jessica. I appreciate the time.
No.
I just want to put a finer point in this. If the federal regulation changes the beginning of the year, does the state of Connecticut then automatically adopt that from your expectation? And then even if we don't change our policy, does that take effect? Or do we have to change our policy for it to take effect in the district?
Really good questions. So just to be clear, the state of Connecticut doesn't have to adopt anything.
Right.
The federal law kind of sits above state law, and it just is there. So that's question number one. but to your good question before, could the state of Connecticut file a lawsuit seeking to enjoin that? Maybe. I mean, that would be very interesting if they did that, but they don't have to take any affirmative action to adopt it. Number two, your second question is yes, that law applies to the Weston Public Schools, whether or not the board adopts the policy, as soon as it takes effect. That's created some interesting, challenging situations at the start of this school year, because I had school districts that had a Title IX issue on day one. And clearly their board had not had a chance to meet and adopt the new policy. So my advice to them was, you still got to apply the 2024 regulations. You should have your superintendent administratively adopt the regulations, because many boards, and in fact, I think you too, the board does not have to vote to adopt the administrative regulation. So that was kind of a way around the fact that the board hadn't yet adopted the policy. It's not ideal, but that's what you have to do.
So we're waiting to see if the trigger here for us is if the state of Connecticut does not, if they adopt the federal regulation. Whenever they do, they can slow walk it, right? But if they adopt the federal regulation, you're shaking your head now. So,
the state of Connecticut doesn't adopt anything.
Oh, it doesn't adopt.
They don't do anything. They're just automatically in effect. They can't slow walk anything.
Oh, I see. It automatically takes effect unless they file a lawsuit.
Correct. I think it's highly unlikely, A, that they would file a lawsuit, and B, that if they did, it would be an injunction would be granted.
Okay. All right. So the feds changed it for all intents and purposes for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's in effect.
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
That's the prediction. But again, I think that what's confusing about this, and Michael, understandably, is that the state of Connecticut has its own sexual harassment laws. And what has been confusing for families and for employees and for everybody is that under the 2020 regulations, those laws were very, very different. The definition of sexual harassment was very, very different. Now, under the 2024 regulations, it is the same. It is exactly the same. So when I expect the 2020 regulations will come back into effect, we're going to have this divergence again. We're going to have two different standards that will have to kind of coexist. So one could be in violation of this Connecticut sexual harassment laws, but not in violation of the federal sexual harassment law. And the procedures that apply to investigate that are also radically different. They're the same now.
That sounds like it's going to be ugly, honestly, moving forward. Administratively, it's going to be ugly because we're going to have such different baselines.
And it was before. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we dealt with it then. We'll deal with it now. Having said that, so many moving parts, so many moving pieces. Title IX, as it stands, sports. Where are we? Where are we currently? And how, we have transgender protections in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Where it's going to change at the federal level. How are we going to work on that? How are we going to accept that? How do we move forward?
So that's Sharon. I'm not really honestly prepared to talk about that because it's a totally separate issue and I have to look at the latest there. I will say it's a totally separate thing from what we're talking about now. The policy that we're talking about really has nothing to do with sports, except as one might argue. When you say sports, I assume you're talking about I'm a transgender student and I want to participate on the sports team that aligns with my gender identity and expression, right? I mean, that's a complicated issue even in Connecticut. My expectation is that it's not going to be permitted, basically. It already is permitted to a limited extent. The policy that we're talking about does apply if somebody feels that they have been discriminated against or harassed on the basis of their gender identity or expression, even within the athletic context. But that's even a separate issue from what sports team can I participate in and what are the rules around that. That's a good question. Stay tuned. But I think that the short answer is it's going to be hard.
Yeah. No, I thought that it would be hard to. I knew it was somewhat of a separate issue, but I could also see them wrapping, I've been discriminated against because of into this policy as well. So, all right.
You're right.
So,
and they have, but the federal government has tried to keep them separate for now.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Thank you.
And Jessica, when they diverge, right? When those policies diverge, I guess I wasn't as in tune to this beforehand, but what happens in that case? So now you have an expanded sort of a lower threshold, right? Expanded scope of the definitions. Let's say it goes back, but Connecticut, of course, layers on top of that or within that, sort of its own protections. Mm-hmm. So if someone feels like there is, there are these protections that Connecticut offers, but that the federal government doesn't, do we defer to the state, obviously, on that? Like, are we covered by, do we defer to most restrictive policy there? And I guess then that could go up through the courts at some point.
Yeah. So forgive me, because this is going to be a very kind of esoteric explanation, but it is what it is. Let me just give you a concrete example. Let's say somebody says that I was harassed on the basis of my gender identity and expression. I walked into a bathroom, the unisex bathroom. Somebody yelled at me and, wrote some nasty word. Okay. Let's say we're back under the 2020 regulations without. By the way, when Biden came into office, he issued a directive saying, so it took 4 years to change the regulations, but Biden said federal regulations do cover gender identity and expression. So for actually 4 years, even when we were operating under 2020 regulations, gender and identity and expression did fall within the federal law. So let's assume that the Trump administration says absolutely not. That's not part of it at all. Okay. And we have the example that I just gave. That would have to be analyzed and processed under state law. And so what does that mean? That means we put aside the Title IX policy and regulations, and we do kind of our standard school-based investigation, and we look at the definition of sexual harassment under Connecticut law, which includes harassment on the basis of gender identity and expression. Frankly, the procedures that apply there are a much more streamlined, less onerous, much more efficient and time efficient, timely process. And there's less actually due process, so to speak, for the respondent the accused in that situation. So you might have an allegation like that. It might get investigated in a day or two, and then the person responsible, if it's substantiated, will get their consequence. If that were processed under federal law, that whole investigation might take 90 school days with multiple opportunities to ask questions of the other witnesses, to inspect evidence, to write a response, to have an advisor. It's a much different process. So the short answer to your question is it still gets reviewed, but it goes into a different bucket in terms of how it gets investigated.
And then can that respondent at that point, and this is just curiosity, and then I'll let you go, but can that respondent then, let's say there's a judgment against them, that respondent say, okay, well, I'm going to take this to I don't know, federal court, right? I'm going to elevate this beyond the state. Then there's a different standard, technically, if the Trump administration changed, let's say, those definitions. Is that right, Jessica?
They would have to file a lawsuit alleging that their rights were violated under some law. If federal law doesn't even apply to that situation, I don't know what federal cause of action they would have.
Okay.
So if it did, if we were processing it under federal Title IX law, then one of the many reasons we follow the law is that we do run the risk that we're violating the respondent's due process rights, and that respondent would have a cause of action under federal law. But we are completely outside of that bucket.
Yeah, totally. So bottom line here is, we can keep the language, stay tuned for any changes. We don't have to be super reactive in that it changes today. Tomorrow we have to change the policy because in effect, there's a grace period for us to change it. But in effect, any changes that happen at the federal level automatically become executed for us as a district anyway.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, I will say that if and when the changes happen, I will recommend that this committee take that up as their first order of business.
Okay.
You know, but do you have to have an emergency meeting on August 2nd? No. I would meet in September at some point.
Yeah, look, it's awesome to hear because I was fretting sort of us having to be super reactive to this, and we will be timely to your point, but you know, not that we need a special meeting to get this passed anyway. So okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that is that, I mean, it would be nice to just put it on the calendar and do it. But the reality is, I don't think that the 2020 regulations are going to come back in exactly the same form. So I think that there's going to be a lot of work, even for my team to do, to modify our model policy yet again. So, you know, I don't even think we're going to have one for you to look at on August 2nd. So this whole thing, I guess I'm keeping my job because there's just been so much to do in this space, and it's just not going to end anytime soon.
Which is why thank you to Lisa for inviting you, and we really appreciate. I really appreciate because I was again just trying to understand how flexible as a district we needed to be, and I want to be prepared for anything going forward. So thank you, seriously.
Yeah, no problem, and we're on top of it. I mean, we monitor this on a daily basis, so I'll certainly let you know if anything changes.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you, Jessica, so much for helping us out and explaining.
Good to see you all. Happy holidays.
Nice to see you, Jess.
Thanks. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jessica.
As a note, taking a look through all, what was it, 105 pages? I did find, I just saw, I mean, a lot of it seemed very straightforward, just taking out some language that wasn't appropriate. But I did find, and I wanted to bring this to your attention, on page 92 of the document, that there's a URL that was inserted in there. And for some odd reason, the URL was Weston Women's League, Main Street, Weston.
I don't know where you are on page 92. Jody, do you know what she's talking about?
Page 92 of what was sent to us as part of the overall agenda. It was actually page 5 of one of the other documents, but if you scroll down.
Page 5. Which document are
under? Oh, hold on. It's let me get to that now.
Oh, you told maybe community, because that was the latest one that we just added that we have to discuss.
Let me see.
Maybe that was community.
You sent agenda. Here we go. Page. I'll get there. Page 6, page 5, 92. Hold on.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, you're right. I must have grabbed the wrong link.
Yeah, it's just the link that needs to be replaced. That's all.
Yeah, Weston Women's League. What is that?
Good catch. Good catch.
Thank you. And you think you don't read all these things, ladies and gentlemen.
That is weird. I will fix that for you. Thank you so much.
Good catch.
That was the only thing that I saw in there. Michael, did you have anything?
Nope, got it.
I just saw my question was on the what is this? Disabilities personnel. On pages 3 and 4, how come we didn't strike the bracketed sort of information? Was there a reason why we didn't do that? Because we did it in the student draft.
On page 3 and 4.
Sorry,
I'm policy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Which policy?
Which one?
The ADA personnel.
Oh wait, that's the first one.
Is it the first one?
That's the first policy, right?
Yeah. Did you guys mean to strike the bracketed language? You did strike it in the students doc. So, for example, on the top of page 3, it says the following administrative procedures are not part of the section, blah, blah, blah. However, because school districts are required, do you see that?
Yeah.
So that wasn't, that was,
So
that was,
P4118.13.
yes.
Yep. I see it.
Top of that first page there under Shipman.
And then under students, you did. You're right. R5114.7.
Right, we did under students, and there were 2 places, Jody, in the personnel draft where we had that language that we didn't strike.
I will strike those out. They
Okay.
they would come out in the final draft.
Okay.
Yep. I'll strike those out for you. And the community one that we added in was a new policy for us to talk about today, but it basically just mirrors all the other ones. We just realized there was a community one we needed to add to this. So that was it. Okay.
One other big question for you guys was the difference between the students. So wait, where is this? In the non-discrimination drafts, I know we've taken a look at these before. Is it the director of pupil personnel services for students, and then for personnel is the director
Yes.
of HR?
Mhm. Correct.
Yep.
Because in personnel, I see, unless I'm
That was something that I wanted to go over a second time to make sure that I had the right people overseeing the right things. So for students, it's PPS, and for staff, it's HR.
Yeah, staff and administrators.
Yeah, is that everywhere? So for example,
It could be everywhere, and I want to double check those. Yes.
No, it's not. I'm looking at it right now.
right, it's
I
not.
had to, yeah. There were so many places that needed switching that I want to go back and make sure that I
Yeah,
had those.
you have under personnel, director of pupil services. That's not correct.
Right.
Yeah.
For
That's
Okay.
all supposed to be on page 3. None of that is director of pupil services.
so
Personnel has to be HR.
Yeah, I would just do a
Yeah.
Control F,
yes,
Jody, and just switch those all, because
Yeah.
it's 3, it's page 5, it's all throughout.
It's
Page
the whole
3.
personnel policy is wrong. It
okay.
doesn't
I will
have
change,
HR.
yeah, I will change all of those people.
Great.
Good
Also,
catch, Michael.
yeah, very nice.
Got it.
We removed the section 504 referral forms. Why, was there a reason as to why we're taking those out?
I don't know where you are.
Sorry, I don't either half the time. Let's see. This is on,
They are all
Notice-
part of CT SEDS. They are all online forms.
okay,
could
so that's why
go
we're
out.
removing them?
No, so where are we? I'm sorry.
Right now, I'm looking at Notice of Parents, Students' Rights under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990.
Mhm.
There's no policy number per se on this, but add page, I guess maybe it is.
Yeah,
probably
I
a
see.
different
I know
policy.
it's the first policy.
Yeah, I understand. All four.
I mean, if you want to keep them in, you can keep them in, but they're all part of CT SEDS that get auto-generated.
Okay,
I mean, I can leave them in there if you want me to. I can just double check with pupil services that what they have in CT SEDS matches what's here.
Well, they have to be in the policy because people have to be able to look at the policy. How can they see CT says if they don't have access to it?
We can keep them in. Got it. I'll take out all the strikeouts on those.
all right, good.
Got it.
But we just better make sure that they mirror CT says.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
All right,
I will do that.
If you were
those are the
looking
only
for
things.
pedantic comments, Jody, you got them this morning.
So
No
sorry.
problem. No,
You've got a
that's
lot going
fine.
on.
There were so many changes to strike out and change on here that I'm glad you went through them with a fine tooth comb, because sometimes I just need a second set of
So
eyes.
let's double check on the personnel and the students one. I'm talking now, well, wait. which is the first read and which is not? The 504 disabilities, that is,
A and B have already did go to the board to be talked about, but then we pulled it from going for a second read.
okay.
We're going to bring everything back again for a first read.
C. Okay, so A and B went for a first read. What about C?
C has not. We're bringing that to the policy committee now, and then we can bring that as a first read.
Well, when you guys are saying
them all together and move them all forward.
That's what I'm
Okay,
saying.
so
Right?
it's at the second read where they vote.
Yes.
So the non-discrimination community policy is not going before the board.
No, that one has not
So
gone.
what I'd like to do at the board meeting, because we want to make sure we have enough time for safety and security. I would recommend we bring the non-discrimination community to the board for a first read.
Mm-hmm.
Then in January,
We
we
bring
do
everything.
all the others for the second read and vote.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
yes.
Yes.
Because it's too, this one, that one, it's too
It's too much
confusing.
at one time. Got it.
So let's do that. So then they'll all get approved at the same time.
Mhm.
And it doesn't, because I don't want to go down a quagmire at the December meeting with us
Mhm.
if it's clearer this way.
Yes, I
Sounds
agree.
good.
And then that gives her time to make all those changes and everything, get the forms correct. Okay.
Perfect.
Got it.
All right. Any other questions or comments on these policies? I think the next thing is, Jody, you said you had done some research on a policy site,
Yes.
Microscribe. Okay.
Historically, the way our policies always worked, we had them in PDFs and they were just stored on a page on our website. Then when we started using Board Book, when Lisa and I came on board, I noticed that Board Book had a little section where we could include our policies there. So I incorporated them there. What I have come across in talking to some of the other districts around here, basically it was Westport that I was speaking with, my counterpart there. They were investigating this policy website. And it's a company called Microscribe. And what they do is they take all of our policies that we have, they turn them into editable documents. So even those really old ones that you'll see on our website that are blue pages and yellow pages, it will turn everything into editable formats. Any Connecticut state statutes that are referenced in our policies, they will hyperlink for us.
That's
and
great.
put all of this onto our website. And the beauty of this, the component that I think is the most important is it is searchable. So if you want to, let's say, for example, look at a policy on video, you go into that little search bar and you type in video, and every policy where the word video is mentioned will come up. So if an administrator or a board member or a community member is looking for a policy on something, it is very searchable and it is visually much more presentable than what we have right now. I can share my screen quickly if you want me to, and I can show you what one of the sites looks like. Give me 1 second. I'm going to present.
As you're pulling that up, Jody, are those documents, do they have to be stored on their site? Sorry, I missed that. Or can they be on, will you have access to them on our own site?
They will be stored on their site.
Okay.
When we have a policy update, we would give it to them. And within, I think, 48 hours, they would then turn our document into an editable format and put it on their site. So basically, they will house it as well as us.
Oh, okay. We will house it. It's not okay because I want to make sure, like,
I would always have our documents.
Yeah. Are we handing that over? Then they have the documents, and they're just going to give us access to PDFs unless we pay on a monthly basis, for example, and then we're going to lose it. But we're not. Okay.
Yeah, we would. There is a cost associated to this.
Sure.
It would cost us $1,600 a year for them to maintain this site for us and to do all of this work. The initial upfront cost would be $900 for them to take everything that we currently have on our site and turn them over into this editable format and add all the hyperlinks to it.
$900 for the entirety?
For them to take a look at all of our policies, convert everything over into an editable format, and add all of the state statute hyperlinks for us.
That sounds
and get
pretty
the whole website
inexpensive.
set up.
Yeah.
And then it would be $1,600 a year for them to maintain it.
And who has access then for, you said it's an editable document. Do we have access to that, or is it exclusively them?
We would have access to it as well as them.
Okay.
Because you would also be able to download. We could choose a format, either a Word document on their site or a PDF on their site. I would go with PDF. I see no reason to have a Word document, accessible on our site for people. So for example, Groton School is the one in Connecticut that currently is using this. So this is what their policy website looks like. I'm not necessarily a fan of all these colors. They can design it a little bit differently for us. So for example, if you go into community relations here, you will see how their policies and regulations pop up, and they break them out in terms of policy and regulations instead of having it all in one document. If you looked at students, these are all the policies and regulations in Series 5000 for students. If you go up here to this little search bar and you were to type in video.
I'm not seeing any of the movement or changing. Are you, Michael?
I think you're on a different screen, Jody, maybe. Are you on a different screen?
I'm just seeing.
Hold on 1 second. Let me go back and share my screen again.
If you have multiple screens up, sometimes it'll.
Yep. Let me go back to, where is it? Let me go back to this one.
Okay, so as you're pulling that up, Westport is considering using this, but
Yes.
Groton is already using it.
Yes, Westport is considering using it because they're looking for something different than their CABE sites. Groton is the only one in Connecticut that currently uses it right now. The Connecticut State Department of Education also uses it for something that they use. And this company is looking to branch out further into Connecticut as well. But it really is a very robust site for a small little company. And I think the key feature for me is the search feature, to be able to go in and search some of these websites, some of our policies, and find what we're looking for. I think administration would find that very useful. And I think we would also.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great tool. Have you run this past Dan DeVito at all?
Yes, I have. He likes it as well.
Okay.
We have to, consider this also through the lens of our budget.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we wanted to bring it to your attention. I was hoping that we could do our own internal bot, but it takes a lot of hours to put it all together and everything else. So it's definitely something that we probably should explore further.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, $900 initial setup fee seems low, and $1,600 a year for maintenance doesn't seem outrageous. So I'm comfortable with recommending this moving forward. Michael, how are you feeling about this?
Yeah, no, look, I think we should consider it. My only question for Dan is, if we had to move on from this site, is it a pain to untangle in any way? And so that's my only. I'm not expecting an answer now, but it's something for Dan to think about, I guess, later on.
Yep. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to bring it to your attention and just give you a little idea of what I'm working on to try and streamline this process for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody.
Sounds good.
Perfect. All right. So go ahead.
I'd like to talk a minute about future policies.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get it? Okay. So we had talked about reviewing our civility policy, which I think would be good to do. The last time it was examined was February 2019, which coincidentally was right before the wonderful world of COVID, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
CABE is a very interesting policy, and they have a lot of different versions on it that are very much more involved because there's a lot more descriptors in it. Anyway, what I'd like to do is I'd like to run it by the administrative team first, because there are different, here's a policy, here's an optional one to consider. I feel like we should do the legwork on that for you and then bring forward the one that we think captures the spirit best in CABE. So we will be looking to do that in January. But it talks about all kinds of things, parental involvement, public participation, visiting the schools, employee to employee, employee to student, community member, board member. It gets into a lot of, some of the things are good details about, respect and courtesy, moderate tone, respectful listening, appropriate and courteous use of electronics, things like that. Anyway, more to follow on that. I think that would be a good one to bring forward in January to the policy committee. And so tomorrow, actually, we have a meeting with our administrative team meeting. The district administrative team meeting is tomorrow, and I'm going to share with them a couple of these versions and have them get some feedback on what they think.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yep. Sounds good.
The wellness
All right.
policy is also in the works, being revised, and in the meeting, I think, next week. On that, there's a small subcommittee working through that. That's another high flying policy that's out there. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else, Jody?
I think we were going to look at meeting conduct in conjunction with civility, because the meeting conduct has a civility piece to it. So
that one, yes.
Mhm.
Oh, and the
bus.
The bus, the video on the bus. That's the one that we still haven't. No, it's an important one. That's the one that we want Shipman to take a look at through the lens of our other one. So, hey, I have to say, this committee has been really doing great work. We're on top of our game here, guys.
Well, you guys are being very proactive in all this stuff. We're just reacting to what you're putting in front of us. But
well, no, your good thoughts are important. Look at the things you caught today. Look at the idea of the video on the bus. We've got to, these policies are just too important. And I feel like for a period of time here, probably because of COVID, they were stagnant, and we gotta, it's inexcusable to have policies that back in the 1990s that haven't been updated. I mean,
Agreed.
It's embarrassing.
Well, we're doing it. That's what counts.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
moving forward, and thank you guys for doing all the legwork on this and bringing it to us. Michael and I, we and Steve, we have the job where we get to poke holes in it, and that's kind of the easy part, right? So, thank you for doing all the work and putting it together for us.
certainly, yeah. Thank you.
All right. So, do we have any other future policies that we want to discuss? If not, I believe, let me take a look. I think our next meeting is scheduled for January 7th. Right. All right. So next scheduled meeting, January 7th. If there's nothing else, anything else, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Hold on, Lisa, you're waving your phone.
Moved.
What?
Oh, yeah, I'm waving my phone.
All right. It's
Sorry.
just us now. So, I second.
I don't know.
whatever.
I'm just
We're
waving
adjourned.
it.
Yep, so moved. Yep.
Anyway,
Okay.
everyone, have a great holiday. If we don't, well, we'll see each other
Yeah.
on the 16th too. So, great to see everyone. And we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.